Welcome back to the internet with part 3 of random true stories of weird stuff that's happened to people. My dad was friends with a crow that lived at his workplace for a few years while we lived in Bosnia, and one day, Poe was his name, came up to him and started showing my dad that he couldn't fly properly. Like really exaggerated how he couldn't fly. So my dad picked him up and put him in an open box and took him home to me and my mom. Poe lived with us for a few days and acted like he's been with people for his whole life, even though he was clearly a wild crow. He ate from our hands and would hang out with us on the patio, and he even let me hold him, which was a surprise given I was about 3 at the time. Bosnia didn't have a lot of air conditioning, so we always had the sliding door to the patio open, so it's not like Poe was trapped. After maybe 3 days, he decided he was feeling better and flew off after catching our attention to let us know he was going. My dad never saw him again since we lived around 10 miles away from where my dad worked, and I guess he never made it back. Still, it was a very cool experience to have a pet crow for a few days. Yeah, crows are pretty weird animals. I've heard quite a few stories of just how smart they can be. They really put dogs and cats to shame, let's be honest. My grandfather was committed for alcoholism in the 1940s and stayed several years in a psychiatric hospital. Fast forward 60 years and I'm touring that hospital for work reasons, as I was part of the team planning its replacement. I heard horror stories of how patients were treated in the past. I never told anyone my grandfather was one of those patients. Yeah, it is really strange when one location comes into your life for 2 completely unrelated reasons. Like one time I lived next to this broken down, abandoned big house. And then like 6 years later I met somebody who said they used to clean houses and they cleaned that abandoned house back when it was functioning. Just kinda crazy how time does stuff like that. A few years ago I was working at a pretty miserable place. When I got off work it had begun to rain and I had no umbrella. The crosswalk was red and there wasn't any shelter from the rain nearby. So I stood there getting soaked, desperately wishing I could be home. A couple of drunk middle-aged dudes came up waiting to cross the street. I didn't look at them in case they got rowdy, but one of the men looked at me and handed me his umbrella. I tried to refuse, but he said, "Your head is more precious than mine." Then the light turned green and he stumbled along sharing his friend's umbrella. It was a simple and incredibly kind gesture that made me feel like I mattered. I still have the umbrella, and I'll never forget the moment a drunk old man cheered me up during a dark time. I also hope he didn't regret losing the umbrella after he sobered up. It was a really nice one. It's kind of funny how being drunk can really just exaggerate your personality. Some people get really nice, some people get really mean. Some people are so nice that they'll just give away everything they own. I was walking home from a school event late at night. I was a girl and didn't want to walk home alone at night because, girl. But I was too shy to bum a ride from someone. When walking to and from school, I always took a shortcut through the copse of trees, which shaved off about 5 minutes of walking time. As I was walking, I saw what looked like a person walking out of the trees. I stopped, they stopped. I took a step forward, so did they. I stepped to the right, they stepped to the right. I was already scared, but now I was terrified. So I started yelling at the person. "Hey, I can see you, what do you want? Don't mess with me, a-hole." No response. I took another step forward, and the other person did too, and then I realized that I was being backlit by a street lamp, and I had been posturing and screaming at my own shadow. See, these are the kind of situations that would be funny if you were just sort of like a bystander witnessing this whole thing, because it would just seem so bizarre in the moment. I got to climb into a crack in a glacier in Iceland and ventured nearly a mile into it. When I was about as far as you could be inside, my stomach started doing flips and my colon started working overtime. I needed to crap, and I needed to do it now. So I dropped my trousers and squeezed one out deep inside a glacier. It was the coolest place I've ever pooped, in both senses of the word. Now, I've never really heard of, like, exploring deep inside of a glacier. I mean, I imagine it's similar to exploring a cave, except that it's a cave that can move around you and might collapse. The first time I started playing RuneScape was when I was like 5. I was a smart kid, so I could read and write really well for my age, but typing was hard, so I was able to get by playing games on my own. One day I was somewhere mining just with this one other dude, and he started sending me messages. And I'm a friendly 5-year-old, so I would very slowly message him back. After a bit, the questions started getting more and more odd. Started as just simple, "How old are you?" and quickly developed to, "Where do you live?" and "Where do you go to school?" Big red flags like that. But I'm a 5-year-old, and I'm responding to all this stuff in 5-year-old manner. I'm 5, guess, spends 10 minutes trying to type out my full name. Spends 20 minutes trying to type out my mailing address and home phone number. Ultimately, the guy only learned how old I was because I was never able to finish typing any other answers before he could ask me another question, and he wound up leaving. I told my mom about it a while later, thinking nothing of it, and she flipped and banned all of us from playing online games for like 8 years. I kind of remember those days too of being online when I was really young and being such a slow typer that you basically couldn't communicate with anybody. I mean, I would sometimes get very friendly and just chatting up regular conversations in my Warcraft 3 matches when I was 10 years old, but I never went so far as to give out my address. I feel like a dork, but here goes. I didn't know what periods were until I had them, so when I was bunking a class when I was 10, I told my teacher I had a stomachache, and she asked me if I had periods. To which I said, the next period is social studies. And she asked again, and I said the last period was science period. She said never mind and told me to go off. The same year, when we were going for a trip from school, when the guide teacher told us we had to take pads, I asked why we had to bring writing pads to my friend. She said, sanitary pads. And I said, I don't know about y'all, but my exam pad is pretty clean. Yeah, this is why it's good for parents to actually teach kids stuff. I know it can be scary, you don't want to bring up the topic with your kids, but maybe you should tell them before this kind of thing happens. The dream I had a while ago that made me laugh so hard I woke up. My best friend invites me over to meet his new pet cats. The first few ones are perfectly fine. Then he brings out the last one, a long-haired patterned on top and white underneath, and warns me, this one's kind of stupid, so I had to write his name on him. The last cat is very friendly, and immediately rolls over so I can pet his belly. Written on it, in sloppy black Sharpie, is Kevin. You know, usually when we tell stories about dreams on this channel, it's about very cryptic and sort of scary type dreams that tell the future. When in reality, most dreams are just complete nonsense that your mind pukes up. Apparently I talked really clearly in my sleep. I had my closest friend sleep over one day in my late teens. According to her, in the middle of the night, I sat straight up in bed with my eyes open and glanced out of my bedroom window. Then I turned to her and put my fingers over her lips and whispered, "Shh, they're coming." I don't remember any of this, but she said she couldn't fall back asleep all night. I also told my boyfriend in my sleep once that he had giraffe arms, giraffe legs, and no heart, because I guess I was mad at him in my sleep. I don't ever remember what I said. I talk almost every night, according to my partner. See, I would actually find something like this kind of entertaining. In some ways, maybe you could get them to come out and tell you something that they wouldn't tell you when they were awake. This is a story from a through hike I went on this past summer. I was over 3 weeks into a month-long hike, and I was starting to have major motivation problems. It was a rainy day, and I decided, F it. I'm not going to wear any rain gear because you just get so hot in addition to being soaked. I climbed to the top of a lookout point and met a man with his 2 teenage children. He's super funny and nice, and we hit it off and chat for a bit. He asked me about what I'm eating and how my hike is going. After weeks of being mostly solo most of the time, it's so good to talk with a good conversation partner. But it's storming and we're high up, so we shortly part ways. Anyways, the next day of my hike is brutal. My gear is still damp and my body was not holding up as well as I hoped. I'm fatigued to my core, and I want to be done, but I'm determined to go 15 miles anyway. One of my longer days. So mile 11 to 13 are a beach walk portion. I thought, great, that'll be fun. Absolutely not. Walking through the tiny beach rocks in hiking boots with a 40-pound back is really hard. I dumped a full cup of rocks out of my shoes afterwards. I get to the end of the walk, and there's a little bridge leading back towards the woods. On the bridge, there's a sign that says, lowest elevation point of the trail. And I'm thinking to myself, I get it, today is the worst day. Man, this trail really knows how to kick someone when they're already down. So I keep going, and I make it to a road crossing with trail signs on either side. And on the near sign, I see a gas station bag full of goodies. In my head, I'm thinking simultaneously, no way, and then it has to be for me. I get up close to it, and in permanent marker, all caps, it says my very uncommon first name. I was speechless. Inside there was a full-size bag of kettle chips, a 24-ounce Coke, an apple, and an orange. The kindly man I spoke to asked me of what food I missed the most, and how far I was going. I said potato chips and 15 miles. He delivered. Best day on the trail. I don't usually drink pop, but that Coke, still a little cold, was maybe the best thing I ever tasted. Geez, that guy sounds like some kind of genie. I mean, speaking of hikes, I'm probably going to go on one later tonight after I record this. But, you know, I like to just drive 15 minutes, walk up a mountain, come back down, and then go back home. I'm not somebody that likes to go camping or spend a week out in the wilderness. My grandmother's house had a row of peony bushes in the landscaping. They were in full bloom, deep pink and white, and you could smell them across the yard. My grandmother was busy hanging sheets on the clothesline. The peonies smelled so tempting that 6-year-old me just couldn't resist. I walked over to the peonies, my grandma yelled not to pick them, and I leaned over and took a big, exaggerated whiff. I smelled something that can only be described as what it would feel like if bugs were crawling all over my nose and throat and getting into my mouth. Because they were. The peony I smelled so deeply was covered in ants. What must have been 50 ants flew up my nose and down my throat. So now I hate the smell of peonies. Yeah, it's just like when you're at a golf course and you step on a pile of sand and you think, that sand felt really soft. And then you look down and you've got fire ants crawling up your leg. Oh, look who it is. Faye, no, I wasn't talking about crows and when you were gone. I work at a movie theater concession. This is the story of my best shift so far. It was an opening night for Spider-Man Far From Home, which also happened to be on a Tuesday, which is cheap ticket night. We also had plenty of showtimes for Avengers Endgame, so we knew it was going to be freaking nuts. We popped extra popcorn, stocked up cups and candy, had extra staff scheduled, and even the managers were ready to come help us. And I was on the main till that guests lined up to. An hour into my shift, the rush begins, lineups all the way to the door. Everyone's rushing to fill orders, and I'm working my butt off with the biggest lineup. There's popcorn all over the floor, and I knew that the cleanup afterwards was going to be a big pain. Then something happened that just brightened my day. Just as the rush was dying down, Spider-Man and his girlfriend come up to my till and order. The guy had a full-blown Spider-Man costume for opening night. His girlfriend seemed like she just didn't want to be there, and he was just so hyped for the movie. It was honestly hilarious. I served them their food and drinks, say that I like his costume, and told them to enjoy the movie. But it gets better. Another guy came in with an Iron Spider costume, the suit from Infinity War but without the golden claws, came in, but didn't order anything from the concession. As I was cleaning up, I saw the guy in the Spider-Man costume go up to the Iron Spider costume, and they were like, "Yo, you dressed up too? Awesome, man." And they acted like best friends even though they didn't even know each other. Later in the night, a group of guests were leaving the building, and I saw the two guys in costume chatting away like mad about the movie. The guy's girlfriend was just following behind them, and he didn't even acknowledge her. It was hilarious. See, I wish this kind of thing happened more often. I think that people need to just talk to strangers more. When I was like 6 years old, my dad taught me how to grab ants with the tip of my fingers in a way that the ant couldn't bite me, and I wouldn't hurt it. I'm talking about those big red leafcutter ants. In my country we call them bacacos. Now in my school's playground there were a lot of these ants. I taught my friends how to grab them with the fingertips technique, and we would spend all of our recess time playing with the ants. Eventually, as we were evil little curious kids, we found out that if you plucked out their antennas, they wouldn't recognize each other and would fight to the death. Knowing this, we would spend our day looking for the best battle ants we could find, to make them kill each other for our entertainment. It was only a matter of time until we began making bets. We also started selling each other the best warriors, and more kids joined the business. We didn't know that what we were doing was something wrong, but we kept it a secret from our teachers, only because they wouldn't let us play with insects. The place where we kept our fighters, and the bowl we used as our coliseum, received the name of Bacacolandia, which translates to something like Antland. One day a kid found a really big ant, and sold it to another kid for like 3 times the price of a regular ant. When the big moment came, the big ant turned out to be a really bad fighter, and got its head cut off by a normal-sized ant. The kid said that he got scammed and wanted his money back, so they started fighting. This got our teacher involved, and she was horrified when she found out what we were doing, and that was the end of Bacacolandia. Man, I've never heard of such an underground ring of anything being so successful among school kids. I mean, this seems more elaborate than most Pokemon card black markets. I was at a party a while ago, and I went to use the bathroom, which I thought was unoccupied. I walk in and then notice that there's this guy sitting in the bathtub with a rotisserie chicken. He sits up and finger gesturing for me to wait a second while he finishes chewing, and then says, "Don't mind me." I've seen a lot of random things at parties, but for some reason that one always cracks me up so much. I often wonder what became of Chicken Dude. Yeah, I have to wonder if people ever just go to parties knowing that you're not at your own house, so there's nothing you can lose, and everyone else is going to be so drunk that they don't care what you do, and so you're like, I'm just going to go be the weirdest person I can possibly think of, just because I know I can get away with it. Well, that is the end of this trilogy of random true stories. But yeah, there was quite a bit of diversity. There was a bit more, but I didn't really want to include any of the very graphic or sexual stories that ended up in the thread too. But that's all. Say goodbye, Faye.